Welcome back to this second part of putting together the anti-roll bar that's going to be on our car to keep it a bit more stable. So let's go back into our anti-roll bar code that we left off with. So we've already calculated basically the proportions of the grounded for the left wheel and the grounded for the right wheel, and that's going to be in the variables for how far the left wheel has travelled away along its suspension, I guess you could say, from the centre, and how far the right has. Okay, so down here we're going to work out what our anti-roll force should be. So let's create a float which will be anti-roll force, and that's going to equal the difference between our amount travelled, so travel L minus travel R, and we're going to multiply that by anti-roll. Okay, so we're taking the difference, not force, roll. We're taking the difference of the distance travelled, or the proportion of the distance travelled that the wheels have along their suspension, and using that multiplied by our anti-roll, we can then apply that particular force to the wheel that needs that force added. So if grounded L, if the left wheel is grounded, then we're going to add a force to the rigid body at the position of the left wheel. So add force at position for our left wheel dot transform dot up multiplied by our minus anti-roll force and WL dot transform dot position. So at that position, we're going to add this force. Now, if the wheel is up and it needs to go down, it's going to push it down. If it's down and actually needs to be pushed up, then that will happen as well. Okay, so we need, in this case, the minus for our left because of the way we're calculating the left minus the right up here. That means that when we do it again for the right wheel, we actually do it in the opposite direction. So if grounded right, then we want exactly the same line again. Let's just take this, copy and paste that in, except now we're going to do it to our right wheel colliders. The force is the same, but it's going to be positive in this case, and then right for our transform position. So we're basically pushing on the car either in an upwards direction or a downwards direction on either side where those wheels are. Right, now we have to run this ground wheel. So what we're going to do up in here in this update is actually make it into a fixed update, and ground wheels pass through our wheel left front, and then our wheel left right, and then our wheel right front, and then we run the ones for the back as well. So ground wheels, wheel left back, and then wheel right back. Okay, so that's the code for our anti-roll. Save that and let's go back into Unity. So we come back into Unity. Now we still have, in this case, the brakes aren't coded in at all. On our car body, we have a flip code. That's all right. That's not going to actually stop you from flipping. That's just going to write you. On here, we want to drag and drop our anti-roll bar code. Now, it's got exposed all of these wheels. So we need to grab the wheels, the left front, and we can find that down here. So we've got our front left wheel collider there. Then we want our front right one. So it's our front right collider. We want our back left. So our back left collider, and then we want our back right collider, and we'll put it down in there. All right, so let's now give this a go and see how well we get around that corner this time, and if we can in fact do it without rolling over. We've still got a fairly decent acceleration, which will mean we're going to miss that point, but notice now that the car is stable. It's not actually flipping over. It is, however, missing the waypoint, so we still need to add in a little bit of code to deal with the case. Otherwise, it's just going to go erratic until it hits the correct waypoint, as you can see is going on for me at the moment. Now, hopefully it's going to find the waypoint this time. Nope. Eventually it will find the waypoint and it's going to start going along. Here we go. So it's found that waypoint and corrected itself, and now it's going along this path as before. Still, of course, not particularly accurate with the waypoints. Okay, so let's stop playing at that point. What I'm going to do and suggest is if we just go back into our AI controller, we can fix up the distance to those waypoints. So in the update down the bottom where we've got distance to target is 2 here, let's just change it to 4 just to make it a little bit bigger and to give us a little bit more of a threshold on either side. Okay, so if we go back into our rigid body and have a look at the rigid body settings in the inspector. I know I've said this before about adjusting the center of mass with the colliders, but how do you actually do it on purpose, or I should say manually? Well, the rigid body in the inspector, if you go down into info, drop that down, you're going to see that there's a speed, velocity, and there is a local center of mass and a world center of mass here. So the local center of mass is basically the center of gravity with respect to your vehicle, and it's automatically set up for you, but you can modify that with code. Let's go down to this car body here. Usually the center of mass of a vehicle is going to be somewhere around where the engine is, because that's the heaviest part of the car. Not only do you want to lower it if you want the car to sit closer, well, not physically closer to the ground, but have more of it stuck to the ground so that it doesn't flip or do erratic things, you can move it down. And then you can also move it forward to about where the engine is. Now, you can do it by sheer kind of luck, I guess, or what we're going to do in this case is add in our very own little center of mass object. So with the car body selected, right click on it, and we're going to add my very favorite placeholder, which is a cube. Now, this cube is very large, as you can see there, and we really don't care about how large that cube is. You can see that it is 1 by 1 by 1, but because it's attached to the car body, it's going to get any scaling. So I'm just going to change it within here and make it just a little bit smaller, even though we're going to turn off the mesh render and we won't even be able to see it. But just for now, so that you can see where I'm going to position it, I'm going to hit the W key on that cube and kind of just move it where I think the center of mass should be. And of course, depending on the results that you get from this, you can put it wherever you like. Usually it's going to be in the center of the vehicle if we look at it from the front, not necessarily from the side. So let's just say that is our center of mass for this particular vehicle. That's our cube. I'm going to now rename it in the hierarchy to center of mass, COM. And we will turn off the mesh renderer so that you won't be able to see it. Also, it doesn't need a collider, so you can remove that or turn it off. We only want it for its transform and its position within the transform. Right, so let's go back into our, let's put this in the anti-roll bar code, because it's the one that I guess is setting up the ability to keep this car from flipping over. So down in the start where we've grabbed the rigid body, let's do a rigid body dot center of mass, and that's going to equal our cube. Now we've got to pass that through somewhere. So let's come up to the top and put public game object, and what do we call it? Center of mass. Then down in here, we're going to set the rigid body's center of mass to the com.transform.local position, so that we get its position even though it's inside of that rigid body or attached to that rigid body. We get its relative position that we need to move the center of mass. So we can now save that. We're going to go back into Unity, find our car body, and once that comes up in the inspector, we can then drag and drop our center of mass cube that we created into that spot. So that's down here, and put it like that. Now you're probably not going to notice an awful lot of change with that added when you now play it, but if you were to move it around and experiment with going up hills and going over jumps and all sorts of things, you will find that it does have an effect on how your car runs. That now is our stability bars put in and our flipping. When we come back in the next lecture, we will start looking at how we can sort of more dynamically brake and accelerate based on how far away from each waypoint we are and where, in fact, the next waypoint that we need to get to is.